November 15, 1942, 0103 hours. Northwest of Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. Petty Officer First Class Saburo Nakamura, manning the forward lookout post aboard battleship Kirishima, strained against his Type 88 binoculars, searching pitch-black waters. His ship had just mauled the American battleship South Dakota. Fires blazed across her superstructure, 8,000 yards away. Victory seemed certain. Then shells arrived. Massive 16-inch projectiles smashing into Kirishima's hull with impossible accuracy. But from where? No muzzle flashes. No visible enemy. Just destruction from darkness. His commanders had assured him Japanese night-fighting superiority was absolute. American radar was primitive, worthless for gunnery. They were wrong. November 1942. The Solomon Islands campaign hung by a thread. For 3 months, American Marines had clung to a precarious foothold on Guadalcanal, a jungle-covered island most Americans had never heard of, but which now determined the Pacific War's future. Henderson Field, the captured airstrip, represented the front line. From its coral runway, American dive bombers and fighters controlled daylight skies, interdicting Japanese reinforcement attempts. But daylight belonged to America. Night belonged to Japan. Tokyo called them the Tokyo Express. Fast destroyer runs down the slot, the narrow channel through the Solomon Islands, delivering troops and supplies under cover of darkness. The Japanese Navy owned the night. Their doctrine, refined over 15 years, combined superior optics, rigorous training, and tactical aggression. American sailors dreaded night engagements. August's Battle of Savo Island had cost 4 cruisers in a single night. Cape Esperance in October, another bloody draw. The pattern was clear. When the sun set, Japanese night-fighting superiority turned American technological advantages to ash. Early November brought ominous intelligence reports. Japanese signals intercepts and reconnaissance flights revealed something massive building at Rabaul, the Japanese stronghold on New Britain. 11 large transport ships loading troops, artillery, ammunition, food, everything needed for a major offensive. Code breakers confirmed the target, Guadalcanal. The invasion force carried 7,000 soldiers from the 38th Infantry Division, veteran troops who'd conquered Java and fought in the Philippines. Their mission, overwhelm Henderson Field, recapture the airstrip, reverse 3 months of American gains. But transports alone couldn't survive Henderson Field's aircraft. The convoy needed cover. Vice Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commanding the combined fleet, provided that cover with overwhelming force. 2 battleships, Hiei and Kirishima, equipped with special fragmentation shells designed to shred aircraft and installations. 4 heavy cruisers. 2 light cruisers, 14 destroyers. The battleships would bombard Henderson Field the night of November 12th to 13th, destroying American aircraft on the ground. With air cover eliminated, the slow transports could land unopposed. 7,000 fresh troops would storm ashore. Guadalcanal would fall. American commanders faced impossible arithmetic. Rear Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner's Task Force 67 was bringing reinforcements to Guadalcanal on November 11th, Marine replacements, 2 Army infantry battalions, ammunition, and food. Turner's cargo ships were vulnerable. Japanese air attacks from Rabaul pounded the convoy throughout November 11th and 12th. 12 Japanese aircraft went down to anti-aircraft fire and fighters from Henderson Field, but the pressure was relentless. If Japanese battleships reached Guadalcanal, they'd annihilate Turner's transports and obliterate Henderson Field. Vice Admiral William Halsey, recently appointed Commander South Pacific Area, made a desperate decision. On November 13th, he ordered Rear Admiral Willis Augustus Lee to take Task Force 64, 2 battleships and 4 destroyers, and stop the Japanese bombardment force. Lee's flagship was USS Washington, BB-56, a North Carolina-class battleship commissioned just 10 months earlier. Accompanying her, USS South Dakota, BB-57, and destroyers Walker, Preston, Benham, and Gwynn. 6 ships against Vice Admiral Nobutake Kondo's armada. Lee was an unusual admiral. Born in Kentucky in 1888, he'd graduated from the Naval Academy in 1908 and spent decades mastering gunnery. At the 1920 Antwerp Olympics, Lieutenant Commander Lee stunned the shooting world by winning 5 gold medals. and 1 silver, 7 total medals in rifle and pistol competition, a record never equaled. He understood precision. He knew angles, trajectories, calculations, and in 1942 he understood something most admirals didn't. Radar changed everything. Washington carried revolutionary technology. The Mark 8 fire control radar could detect ships at 40,000 yards, over 20 miles. More importantly, it could provide accurate range and bearing data precise enough for main battery gunnery. The system's accuracy was extraordinary, plus or minus 15 yards, plus 0.1% of range. At 14,000 yards, that meant accuracy within 29 yards, smaller than a battleship's beam. The SG surface search radar complemented Mark 8, detecting surface contacts at 18,000 yards or more. Together, these systems could find enemies in total darkness and provide targeting solutions for Washington's 9 16-inch guns, all while the enemy remained blind. Lee believed in radar with religious fervor. After the coming battle, he'd write a brutally honest assessment. We realized then, and it should not be forgotten now, that our entire superiority was due almost entirely to our possession of radar. Certainly, we have no edge on the Japs in experience, skill, training, or performance of personnel. Lee knew his crews were green. Washington had been in the Pacific only since August. Most sailors had never experienced combat. The Japanese had been fighting since 1937, 5 years of war against China, then the Pacific explosion in December 1941. Japanese lookouts were legendary, their night vision enhanced by Type 88 12-centimeter pedestal-mounted binoculars. Their gunners had sunk American cruisers at Savo Island before American commanders even understood battle was joined. But Lee had radar, and radar could see in pitch darkness. November 14th, Washington and South Dakota departed Espiritu Santo in the New Hebrides, steaming northwest toward Guadalcanal at 26 knots. 4 destroyers formed a van ahead of the battleships. The crews knew the stakes. Captain Glenn B. Davis, commanding Washington, addressed his crew over the ship's public address system. "We are going into an action area. We have no great certainty of what forces we will encounter. We might be ambushed. A disaster of some sort may come upon us. But whatever it is we are going into, I hope to bring all of you back alive. Good luck to all of us." The words didn't calm nerves. Everyone knew the odds. 6 American ships against an entire Japanese task force. Night fighting in confined waters studded with reefs and islands. The Japanese owned the night. History proved it. Blood proved it. Task Force 64 plunged into the slot as tropical darkness fell. No moon. Scattered clouds. Perfect conditions for Japanese night fighters, and perfect conditions to test whether American radar could defeat Japanese doctrine. In Washington's Combat Information Center, radar operators watched green screens intently. The SG radar swept the darkness ahead, its beam reaching out across miles of black water. November 14th, 23:52 hours. A contact appeared on the SG's screen. Range, 18,000 yards. More contacts materialized, multiple ships bearing north-northwest. The Japanese bombardment force. Lee studied the radar plot. The enemy was over 9 miles away, completely invisible in the darkness. Washington's lookouts strained against their binoculars and saw nothing. Not a glimmer. Not a shadow. The sea was ink. Lee turned to Captain Davis. The Admiral's voice was calm, almost conversational. "Well, stand by, Glenn. Here they come." Washington turned toward the contacts. The Mark 8 fire control radar locked on. In the plotting rooms deep in the ship's armored citadel, analog computers began calculating firing solutions, range, bearing, target course and speed, shell trajectory, Earth's rotation, wind drift. The 9 16-inch guns of turrets 1, 2, and 3 trained toward targets their crews couldn't see. The impossible was about to become real. Lee was going to fight a battleship action in total darkness, engaging enemies beyond visual range, trusting electronics over eyes. No admiral in history had attempted this. No one knew if it would work. But in 7 minutes, the world would learn that radar had made night transparent, and Japan's 15-year investment in night-fighting doctrine was about to become worthless. Understanding what was about to happen requires understanding how naval gunnery had worked for centuries and how radar changed everything overnight. Traditional battleship gunnery was an art form perfected over generations. Optical rangefinders, long tubes mounted high on the ship with precisely aligned mirrors and lenses, measured the distance to a target by triangulation. Skilled operators would sight the enemy ship through their instruments and calculate range. That data went to the plotting room, where mathematicians and mechanical computers calculated a firing solution. The solution accounted for range, target bearing, target speed and course, wind, air temperature, the Earth's rotation, and the parabolic arc of shells that could weigh over a ton each. Gunners would train their massive turrets, elevate the barrels to the calculated angle, and fire. Observers would watch through powerful binoculars for shell splashes. Short, long, left, right. Corrections would be radioed down. New calculations. Another salvo. The cycle took anywhere from 45 seconds to 90 seconds under ideal conditions. At night, the system collapsed. Optical rangefinders needed light. Even with the best optics, lookouts could spot enemy ships at perhaps 10,000 yards on a clear night with good visibility, often much less. Japanese night fighting doctrine addressed this limitation brilliantly. They developed flashless powder that produced almost no muzzle flash, hiding their gun positions. They fired illumination rounds, star shells, that would burst above the battlefield, flooding targets with brilliant light without revealing the firing ship's location. 8-inch star shells produced 1,700,000 candelas of light, effective to 8,000 meter. Type 88 12-centimeter pedestal-mounted binoculars with enhanced light-gathering optics helped lookouts detect targets at maximum range. It was an elegant system, refined through 15 years of doctrine development and hundreds of hours of training per crew. It worked. Then came radar. The Mark 8 fire control radar represented a quantum leap in targeting technology. Instead of light, it used radio waves. A transmitter sent out pulses of electromagnetic energy at 3,000 megahertz frequency. When those pulses struck a target, a ship's metal hull, they bounced back. The radar receiver detected the returning echo. The time between transmission and reception revealed the target's exact distance. His speed of light made the math simple. Radio waves travel at 186,000 miles per second. A target at 14,000 yards, 7 nautical miles, would return an echo in approximately 75 microseconds. The system measured these tiny time intervals automatically, continuously, providing range data that updated every few seconds. But Mark 8 did far more than measure distance. Its rotating antenna could determine bearing with extraordinary precision, accurate to within 2 milliradians, or roughly 0.1 degrees. The system tracked moving targets automatically, calculating speed and course from how the range and bearing changed over time. All this data fed into analog computers that solved the gunnery equation instantly. Range to target, 14,000 yards. Target bearing, 035 degrees. Target course, 180 degrees. Target speed, 28 knots. Own ship course, 320 degrees. Own ship speed, 26 knots. Wind, 10 knots from the northeast. The computer accounted for everything, even the Coriolis effect from Earth's rotation and output a firing solution. The accuracy was staggering. Mark 8 achieved plus or minus 15 yards base accuracy, plus 0.1% of range. At 14,000 yards, that meant accuracy within 29 yards total. A battleship might be 600 feet long and 100 feet wide. The radar could resolve its position to within 90 feet. More importantly, Mark 8 did all this in total darkness, through rain, through smoke, through any condition that would blind optical systems. The target didn't need to be illuminated. The target didn't need to be visible at all. Radar saw what human eyes couldn't. Washington carried Mark 8 radar sets for her main battery fire control, providing targeting data to her 9 16-inch Mark 6 guns. Each gun fired a 2,700-pound armor-piercing shell capable of penetrating 16 inches of steel plate. At 14,000 yards, these projectiles would arrive on target approximately 27 seconds after firing, impacting with enough energy to punch through a battleship's armored belt and detonate deep inside the hull. The Combination of Mark 8's accuracy and the 16-inch gun's destructive power created a weapon system that could engage enemies beyond visual range with precision previously impossible even in daylight. Complementing Mark 8, Washington also carried SG surface search radar. This system had longer range but less precision, ideal for detecting ships at great distances. SG could spot a battleship-sized target at 18,000 yards or more, depending on atmospheric conditions. Once SG detected a contact, Mark 8 could lock on for precision fire control. The two systems worked in tandem. SG found them, Mark 8 killed them. By November 1942, the U.S. Navy had produced 205 Mark 8 radar sets. The technology was proliferating across the fleet. Every new battleship received it. Cruisers were being retrofitted. The industrial capacity of American electronics manufacturers, RCA, General Electric, Western Electric, allowed mass production of these sophisticated systems. Training programs were rushing officers and enlisted men through radar operation courses. The technology was young, barely proven in combat conditions, but its potential was undeniable. Captain Glenn B. Davis, commanding Washington, understood what radar meant for naval warfare. In a later assessment, he'd write, "Radar has forced the captain, or OTC, to base a greater part of his actions on what he is told rather than what he can see." It was a profound statement. For centuries, ship captains commanded from the bridge, using their own eyes to assess the battlefield. They made decisions based on what they saw, what lookouts reported, what experience taught them. Radar changed that fundamentally. Now captains had to trust electronic systems showing contacts on glowing green screens, contacts that might be 15 miles away, completely beyond any optical confirmation. It required a leap of faith, trusting machines over human senses, believing in invisible electromagnetic pulses more than eyeballs and binoculars. Admiral Lee had made that leap. His Olympic marksmanship taught him that precision wins battles. His engineering background, he held multiple patents related to fire control systems, made him appreciate radar's technical elegance. He believed with absolute conviction that radar gave American forces overwhelming advantage in night combat. Japanese night fighting superiority meant nothing if they couldn't see the enemy, until it was too late. The question was whether the technology would work under actual combat conditions. Electrical systems were fragile. A single component failure, a vacuum tube burning out, a circuit breaking, a power surge could render the entire system useless. South Dakota was about to prove that vulnerability catastrophically. But if the radar worked, if the computers calculated correctly, if the guns fired accurately based on electronic data alone, then Washington could do something no battleship in history had done. Destroy an enemy she never saw, hitting targets beyond the horizon, fighting blind, but seeing everything. The Japanese had radar too, but not like this. Their Type 22 surface search sets could detect large ships at roughly 13 nautical miles. But Type 22 accuracy was abysmal, plus or minus 220 yards in range, 3 degrees in bearing. At 14,000 yards, that meant uncertainty of over 600 feet, larger than the target ship itself. The resolution was equally poor, 1,600 yards, meaning the radar couldn't distinguish between ships steaming in close formation. Type 22 was useful for early warning. It was useless for fire control. Japanese doctrine classified radar as a supplementary tool, subordinate to optical systems and lookout reports. The idea of firing guns based solely on radar data would have seemed insane to Japanese naval officers in 1942. That assumption was about to kill them. The two battleships approaching each other in the darkness represented different philosophies of naval warfare, and a technological gap that neither side fully understood yet. USS Washington displaced 35,000 long tons standard, swelling to 44,800 long tons at full combat load. 4 General Electric steam turbines driving 4 propeller shafts generated 121,000 shaft horsepower, pushing the ship to 28 knots, fast enough to keep pace with aircraft carriers. Her main battery consisted of 9 16-inch 45 caliber Mark 6 guns mounted in 3 triple turrets. Each gun could hurl a 2,700-pound armor-piercing shell 36,900 yards over 20 miles. Rate of fire 2 rounds per minute per gun, meaning all 9 guns could deliver 18 shells weighing nearly 25 tons total every 60 seconds. Protection came from a 12-inch armored belt at the waterline, a 5.5-inch armored deck, and 16-inch thick turret faces designed to resist 14-inch shells. The ship carried 2,400 officers and enlisted men. She'd been commissioned in May 1941, barely 18 months old, still proving herself. IJM Kirishima told a different story. Originally laid down in 1912 as a battlecruiser, she'd been extensively modernized in the 1930s and reclassified as a fast battleship. At 37,200 long tons full load, she was slightly heavier than Washington. Her power plant generated 136,000 shaft horsepower, giving her a top speed of 30 knots, 2 knots faster than her opponent. But her main battery was smaller, 8 14-inch guns in 4 twin turrets. Her armor was thinner, 203 millimeters at the belt, about 8 inches, versus Washington's 12. Her turret faces measured 280 millimeters, 11 inches, versus 16. She was faster but more lightly built, designed for speed over protection. Her crew of 1,360 had decades of collective experience. Kirishima had bombarded Pearl Harbor, raided the Indian Ocean, fought at Midway. She was a veteran ship with veteran sailors who'd survived battle after battle. On paper, Washington held advantages in firepower and armor. But ships don't fight on paper. They fight with crews, doctrine, and technology, and in November 1942, Japanese doctrine was proven, while American doctrine was experimental. Japanese night-fighting superiority rested on 3 pillars: optics, training, and tactics. The Type 88 12-centimeter pedestal-mounted binoculars represented optical engineering at its peak. These massive instruments, 120 millimeters in objective lens diameter, gathered far more light than standard binoculars. Mounted on gyro-stabilized pedestals that compensated for ship motion, they gave lookouts extraordinary capability. A trained lookout with Type 88 binoculars could detect ships at 10,000 yards on a clear night, sometimes further if conditions were perfect. The Japanese Navy drilled lookouts relentlessly. Recruits spent months in darkened rooms, training their eyes to adapt to minimal light. Senior lookouts had years of experience reading wave patterns, spotting silhouettes against horizon glow, distinguishing ships from islands. It was an art, form refined to perfection. Flashless powder complemented superior optics. Japanese naval guns used specially formulated propellant that produced minimal muzzle flash when fired. American and British guns would erupt with brilliant orange flame visible for miles, instantly revealing their position. Japanese guns fired with barely a flicker. This allowed them to shoot without exposing themselves, a decisive advantage in night combat where revealing your position meant death. Star shells provided illumination without compromising Japanese positions. These special rounds contained magnesium flares suspended from small parachutes. An 8-inch star shell could produce 1,700,000 candelas of brilliant white light effective to 8,000 meters. Japanese doctrine called for light cruisers to fire star shells above enemy formations, flooding the battlefield with harsh illumination that turned night into day. Japanese gunners, already dark-adapted and positioned behind their flashless weapons, could engage brightly lit targets with devastating accuracy while remaining invisible themselves. The system had destroyed the U.S. Navy repeatedly. August 9, 1942, the Battle of Savo Island. A Japanese cruiser force commanded by Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa surprised American and Australian cruisers screening Guadalcanal. The battle lasted 32 minutes. 4 Allied cruisers sank. Over 1,000 sailors died. Japanese losses, minor damage to 1 cruiser. October 11th to 12th, the Battle of Cape Esperance. Another night action. The Americans achieved surprise initially and damaged several Japanese ships, but lost the destroyer Duncan and suffered heavy damage to cruiser Boise. The pattern was clear. Japanese night-fighting doctrine worked. When darkness fell, the Imperial Japanese Navy owned the sea. But doctrine built on optics assumes both sides fight within visual range. The Japanese never considered an enemy might see beyond that range. Their radar lagged catastrophically. Type 22 surface search radar could detect large ships at approximately 13 nautical miles, 24 kilometers. But its accuracy was abysmal. Range accuracy, plus or minus 220 yards. Bearing accuracy 3 degrees. At 14,000 yards, those errors meant uncertainty of over 600 feet, larger than the target ship. The system's resolution was worse, 1,600 yards, meaning it couldn't distinguish between ships steaming in formation closer than 3/4 of a mile apart. Type 22 served one function, early warning. It told you enemy ships were in the area. It couldn't tell you exactly where, exactly how many, or provide data accurate enough for gunnery. Japanese naval doctrine classified radar as supplementary. Official guidelines stated radar should assist lookouts and provide advance notice of approaching forces. But actual targeting, actual fire control, depended entirely on optical systems, rangefinders, binoculars, visual spotting of shell splashes. The idea of firing main battery guns based solely on radar data would have seemed absurd. How could you trust electronic echoes over trained human lookouts with decades of experience? That assumption that optics remained supreme was Japan's fatal blind spot. Washington's Mark 8 radar achieved 15 times better range accuracy than Type 22, plus or minus 15 yards versus 220 yards. Bearing accuracy was 86 times more precise, 2 milliradians versus 3 degrees. The resolution allowed tracking individual ships in formation. Most critically, Mark 8 provided fire control quality data, accurate enough to aim and fire main battery guns without any optical confirmation whatsoever. Combined with SG radar's 18,000-yard detection range, American ships could see enemies miles before those enemies saw them. In darkness, that advantage was absolute. The industrial base magnified the gap. American electronics manufacturers, RCA, General Electric, Western Electric, Bell Labs, possessed massive production capacity and cutting-edge research programs. The United States could produce radar sets by the hundreds. Training programs could create radar operators by the thousands. Japanese industry, strained by years of war in China and now fighting across the Pacific, lacked the capacity to match American electronics production. Even if Japanese engineers designed better radar, and they were trying, Japan couldn't manufacture it in meaningful quantities or distribute it fleet-wide. The technology gap wasn't just about who had better equipment, it was about who could equip every ship with that better equipment. More fundamentally, Japanese doctrine couldn't adapt quickly enough. Time 0.5s. The Imperial Japanese Navy had spent 15 years perfecting night fighting techniques based on optical superiority, thousands of hours of training, hundreds of tactical exercises, real combat experience proving the doctrine worked. Institutional momentum behind proven methods was massive. Radar represented unproven foreign technology. Even had Japanese intelligence fully understood American radar capability, which they didn't, convincing admirals to abandon demonstrated supremacy in favor of untested electronics would have taken years. Vice Admiral Nobutake Kondo, commanding the force approaching Guadalcanal, had no idea what was about to happen. His intelligence briefings mentioned American ships carried radar, but radar was primitive, supplementary. His lookouts were the best in the world. His gunners had sunk 4 cruisers at Savo Island. His battleship Kirishima had shelled Henderson Field on October 13th, damaging aircraft and installations. His doctrine was proven. His confidence was absolute. He was steaming toward USS Washington, which was tracking his every move on radar from 18,000 yards. He had no idea he'd been detected. No idea an enemy battleship was watching his force on glowing green screens. No idea 9 16-inch guns were training toward his flagship. Computers calculating firing solutions, awaiting only the order to fire. The perfect surprise was possible only because the Japanese didn't know what they didn't know. Radar had made night transparent, but only one side knew it yet. The other side was about to learn in the most violent way possible. You cannot fight what you cannot see, and the enemy sees everything. November 14th, 23:52 hours. USS Washington steamed northwest through the black waters of the Slot, the narrow channel cutting through the Solomon Islands. No moon. Scattered clouds obscured starlight. The sea was calm, almost oily smooth, offering no whitecaps or wave patterns to help optical detection. Perfect conditions for Japanese night fighters, and perfect conditions to test whether American radar could make darkness irrelevant. In Washington's Combat Information Center, radar operators hunched over glowing green screens. The SG surface search radar swept the darkness ahead, its rotating antenna sending electromagnetic pulses across miles of empty ocean. Range rings marked distance in 1,000-yard increments. The screen center represented Washington's position. Everything else was black void until 23:52 hours, when contacts appeared. Multiple returns. Range 18,000 yards, over 9 miles. Bearing north-northwest. The contacts were moving south, closing. Admiral Lee studied the radar plot. The geometry was clear. Japanese bombardment force approaching Guadalcanal. Washington's mission intersecting their course. Visual range in these conditions, perhaps 5,000 to 8,000 yards, more likely less. The Japanese were completely beyond optical detection. Lee's lookouts, straining through their binoculars from positions high on the superstructure, saw nothing but darkness. But the radar saw everything. Lee ordered his force into battle formation. 4 destroyers, USS Walker, Preston, Benham, and Gwynn, formed a van 5,000 yards ahead of the battleships. Washington steamed in column with South Dakota following astern. The battleships would hang back, allowing destroyers to scout ahead, make initial contact, perhaps launch torpedo attacks before the big guns engaged. Standard doctrine. But doctrine written for visual combat, not radar warfare. Lee was improvising, adapting traditional tactics to technology that made those tactics obsolete. The Japanese force plunged southward, unaware. Vice Admiral Nobutake Kondo commanded from heavy cruiser Atago. His force included battleship Kirishima, heavy cruiser Takao, light cruisers Sendai and Nagara, plus 9 destroyers. The bombardment mission seemed routine. Intelligence indicated some American ships in the area, probably cruisers, maybe destroyers. Nothing Kondo's battleship couldn't handle. Japanese lookouts scanned the darkness with their Type 88 binoculars. They saw nothing. Their Type 22 radar hadn't detected contacts yet. The American force remained invisible. Midnight passed. November 15th began. The range closed to 15,000 yards. 12,000. 10,000. Still beyond visual range in the pitch darkness. Lee watched the radar. Plot. His destroyers were approaching detection range. The Japanese would spot them soon. Then chaos would erupt. The confused, violent melee of night combat where ships blasted each other at point-blank range and no one knew friend from enemy until it was too late. 00:17 hours. Japanese searchlights snapped on. Brilliant white beams stabbed through darkness, finding American destroyers. The night exploded. Walker, leading the destroyer line, found herself illuminated by multiple searchlights. Japanese destroyers opened fire immediately. 5-inch shells slammed into her superstructure. She attempted to return fire, her guns swinging toward the light sources, but the Japanese gunners were faster, more experienced. A long-lance torpedo, Japanese Type 93, oxygen-fueled, wakeless, devastating, struck Walker amidships. The explosion broke her back. She sank in minutes, taking most of her crew. Preston charged into the maelstrom. Searchlights found her. Shells arrived from multiple directions. Japanese destroyers had surrounded the American van. Preston's captain ordered full speed ahead, attempting to close range and launch torpedoes. He never made it. Heavy caliber shells, probably from Kirishima's 14-inch guns, tore through Preston's thin armor. She caught fire, slowed, and sank within 10 minutes of the engagement's start. Benham and Gwynn fared slightly better. Benham took a torpedo hit that blew off her bow, but her engineering spaces remained intact. She could still move, barely, and began limping away from the slaughter. Gwynn suffered damage from shell hits but remained operational. Both destroyers withdrew, their torpedo attacks unsuccessful, their primary mission, screening the battleships, now impossible. 20 minutes. 4 destroyers neutralized. It was Savo Island all over again, Japanese night-fighting doctrine destroying American forces in brutal close-range combat. But the destroyer sacrifice bought time and created confusion. Japanese attention focused entirely on the burning destroyers. No one noticed the battleships behind them. South Dakota had problems. At 00:16 hours, 1 minute before the destroyer engagement began, her electrical system suffered a cascading failure. A circuit breaker tripped improperly. The failure propagated through electrical buses, knocking out radar, radio communications, and fire control systems. South Dakota went blind and deaf. Her guns could still fire manually, but without radar she couldn't detect targets beyond visual range. Without radio, she couldn't coordinate with Washington. She stumbled forward into the chaos, trying to support the destroyers using optical fire control alone. Japanese searchlights found her at 0022 hours. Range 8,000 yards. South Dakota lit up like a stage under spotlights. Heavy cruiser Otago, light cruiser Nagara, and multiple destroyers poured fire into her. 42 shell hits, mostly 8-inch and 5-inch, smashed into South Dakota's superstructure. Her armor belt held against the smaller shells, but topside structures were devastated. Radar antennas shattered. Gun directors crushed. Fires erupted. 3 officers on the navigation bridge died instantly when shells exploded in the confined space. Captain Thomas Gatch, commanding South Dakota, had no choice. His ship was being destroyed. He ordered withdrawal, turning away from the Japanese force, trying to escape the searchlight beams. The Japanese believed they'd won. 4 destroyers sunk or crippled. 1 battleship smashed and retreating. Vice Admiral Kondo's force regrouped, preparing to continue toward Henderson Field. The bombardment mission could proceed. Victory seemed complete. No one in the Japanese force knew USS Washington existed. Washington had circled south during the destroyer melee, maintaining radar track on all contacts but holding fire. Lee couldn't risk shooting into the confused close-range brawl. He might hit his own destroyers. He waited, watching radar screens, letting the Japanese reveal their positions with searchlights and gun flashes. Now, with South Dakota withdrawing and Japanese attention distracted, Washington stalked her prey. Range to Kirishima, 12,650 yards. The Mark 8 fire control radar had locked onto the Japanese battleship minutes earlier. Washington's fire control computers calculated solutions continuously, range decreasing, bearing changing as both ships maneuvered, target course and speed estimated from radar tracking. The computers accounted for everything: own ship motion, target motion, shell ballistics, wind, temperature, Earth's rotation. 9 16-inch guns trained smoothly toward a target their crews had never seen and would never see. The gun captains stood ready. The plotting rooms reported solutions locked. 100 hours. Kirishima was silhouetted against her own searchlights, illuminating the battered South Dakota 8,000 yards away. Lee watched the radar. His ship was invisible to the Japanese. No searchlights had found Washington. No Japanese guns pointed her direction. She was a ghost, a predator stalking prey that didn't know death approached. Admiral Lee gave the order no admiral had given in the history of naval warfare: open fire. The order to shoot at a target invisible to human eyes, to trust machines completely, to gamble everything on electronic pulses and analog computers. Captain Glenn Davis stood on Washington's bridge, knowing his gunners were aiming at coordinates on a radar screen, seeing nothing through their optical sights. Davis had told his crew, "Radar has forced the captain to base his actions on what he is told rather than what he can see." Now that philosophy faced its ultimate test, turrets 1, 2, and 3 fired. 9 16-inch guns roared simultaneously. The night split with orange flame. American guns still used flash-producing powder, instantly revealing Washington's position. 2,700 pounds of steel per shell, 9 shells totaling 12 tons of metal, hurled toward Kirishima at 2,700 feet per second. Time to target, approximately 25 seconds. Japanese lookouts aboard Kirishima saw the muzzle flashes. They reported new enemy ship bearing south. But in the 25 seconds between Washington's first salvo and impact, Japanese gunners couldn't react. They didn't know the range, didn't know the target's exact position, needed time to train guns, calculate solutions, load and fire. They didn't have time. Washington's first salvo landed short. The range estimate was slightly off. Huge water spouts erupted 100 yards in front of Kirishima. Washington's computers corrected instantly, adjusting for the observed fall of shot. 30 seconds later, the second salvo fired. One straddled the target, shells landing on both sides. Third salvo, 30 seconds after that. Third salvo hit. At 0101 hours and 30 seconds, 16-inch armor-piercing shells struck IJN Kirishima amidships. The battleship that had bombarded Pearl Harbor, that carried the pride of 15 years of night-fighting supremacy, was hit by an enemy she couldn't see, targeted by technology her commanders didn't believe could work. The 7-minute destruction had begun, and Admiral Lee's gamble on radar over doctrine was about to change naval warfare forever. Washington's third salvo struck Kirishima at 0101 hours and 30 seconds. 16-inch armor-piercing shells, each weighing 2,700 pounds, each traveling at 2,700 feet per second, punched through Kirishima's 8-inch belt armor like paper. The projectiles penetrated deep into the battleship's hull before their delayed action fuses triggered detonation. Explosions erupted inside machinery spaces, flooding compartments, and magazine areas. The ship shuddered from internal blasts. Japanese lookouts finally spotted Washington. Muzzle flashes gave away her position at 8,400 yards, but spotting the enemy solved nothing. Kirishima's gun crews attempted to train their 14-inch turrets toward the new threat, but Washington had already adjusted her firing solution. Fourth salvo. Fifth salvo. Every 30 seconds, 9 16-inch guns roared. Every 30 seconds, 12 tons of steel arced through darkness toward a target that Washington's gunners never saw through their optical sights. The gun captains aimed at coordinates provided by the Mark 8 radar. The plotting rooms called out range and bearing from electronic data. The guns fired on faith in machines. The shells arrived with what American action reports later described as uncanny accuracy. Radar-directed fire eliminated the guesswork of traditional gunnery. No need to watch for shell splashes and estimate corrections. The Mark 8 radar tracked Kirishima continuously, updating range and bearing as both ships maneuvered. The fire control computers recalculated solutions automatically. The guns stayed on target. Salvo after salvo hammered the Japanese battleship with mechanical precision that human gunners could never match, even in daylight. Kirishima's return fire was sporadic and inaccurate. Her gunners couldn't see Washington clearly, just muzzle flashes in the darkness 8,000 yards away. They estimated range, aimed optically, fired. Their shells landed nowhere near Washington. Some fell short. Others flew over. None hit. The engagement wasn't a duel, it was an execution. One ship saw perfectly through electronic eyes. The other ship was blind, flailing, dying. Aboard Kirishima, chaos reigned. 16-inch shells tore through superstructure, destroying fire control directors, smashing gun mounts, killing crews. A hit forward penetrated the magazine spaces for the front 14-inch turrets. Flooding teams reacted instantly, opening sea valves to flood the magazines before ammunition cooked off and destroyed the entire ship. The forward turrets fell silent, guns intact but magazines deliberately drowned. Another hit aft destroyed hydraulic pumps that powered the rear turrets and steering machinery. The massive guns could no longer train or elevate. The rudder jammed. Kirishima lost steering control, swinging in an uncontrolled turn while shells continued to arrive. Fires spread across the superstructure. The pagoda-style mast, Japanese battleship's distinctive multi-level command tower, was ablaze, flames consuming wooden fittings and paint. 5-inch secondary battery shells from Washington added to the devastation. 107 5-inch rounds slammed into Kirishima's topside, killing exposed crew, destroying light armor, starting more fires. The battleship that had bombarded Pearl Harbor, that had fought in the Indian Ocean, that carried the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy's night-fighting supremacy, was being methodically destroyed by an enemy her lookouts could barely see and her gunners couldn't hit. Japanese survivors later described the horror. Shells came from nowhere, arriving with no warning, no visible source, just sudden explosions ripping through the ship. Psychological impact was devastating. For years, Japanese doctrine promised night-fighting superiority. Lookouts trained for thousands of hours. Tactics refined through endless exercises. Combat experience proven at Savo Island and a dozen other battles. All of it meant nothing. The Americans could see in darkness. Time 0.5s. Japanese sailors had trained to fight in the dark. They hadn't trained to fight ghosts. 0107 hours. 7 minutes after the engagement began, Admiral Lee ordered ceasefire. Kirishima was a wreck, dead in the water, burning, flooding, helpless. Lee saw no point in wasting ammunition on a ship already doomed. He'd fired 117 16-inch shells, 89% of the maximum possible rate for 7 minutes of continuous fire. An extraordinary firing rate, proof of Washington's crew efficiency and the Mark 8 radar's reliability. Of those 117 shells, at least 9 to 20 scored direct hits. Naval historians still debate the exact count. Post-war surveys of Kirishama's wreck, discovered by Dr. Robert Ballard in 1992, confirmed at least 9 16-inch shell penetrations through armor. The hit rate was phenomenal for night combat at moving targets beyond visual range. Washington emerged untouched. Not a single Japanese shell hit her. Vice Admiral Kondo's entire force, battleship, cruisers, destroyers, had failed to land even one hit on the American battleship that destroyed Kirishima. Part of that was luck. Part was South Dakota, drawing Japanese attention while Washington stalked undetected. But mostly, it was radar. Washington saw the enemy clearly on electronic screens, while Japanese lookouts struggled to find her position in darkness broken only by muzzle flashes that disappeared as quickly as they appeared. Kondo ordered immediate withdrawal. His mission, bombard Henderson Field to cover the transport convoy, was now impossible. Kirishima couldn't fight. The American battleship had proven devastatingly superior. Remaining in the area meant further losses. The Japanese force turned north, abandoning Kirishima to her fate. Light cruiser Nagara attempted to take Kirishima under tow, but the damage was catastrophic. Steering destroyed, flooding uncontrollable through multiple shell holes below the waterline. The bow was settling as water poured into forward compartments. The ship listed 18 degrees to starboard, fires raging across her superstructure. Captain Sanji Iwabuchi, commanding Kirishima, made the only decision possible. At 0300 hours, 3 hours after Washington's engagement, he ordered abandon ship. Time 0.5s, destroyers came alongside to evacuate survivors. 948 officers and men transferred off the dying battleship. 212 crewmen were already dead, killed by shell hits, fires, explosions, flooding. Many wounded would die later from their injuries. The survivors watched as their ship, 30 years old, veteran of 2 wars, pride of the fleet, capsized and sank stern first at 0325 hours, November 15th, 1942. Kirishima settled to the bottom of Ironbottom Sound, joining dozens of ships from both sides that littered the seabed around Guadalcanal. The water was 4,200 feet deep. Her wreck would remain undiscovered for 50 years until deep-sea exploration technology advanced enough to find her. The immediate tactical result was clear. Japanese bombardment mission failed. Henderson Field undamaged. The 11 transport ships carrying 7,000 soldiers no longer had battleship cover. Dawn would bring American aircraft from Henderson Field, dive bombers, torpedo bombers, fighters, to massacre the exposed convoy. Vice Admiral Kondo knew it. He ordered the transports to proceed anyway, hoping to beach them and unload troops before American air attacks arrived. It was desperation, not strategy. But the implications went far beyond one failed mission. November 15th, 1942, 0100 hours, the moment Washington opened fire on a target her crew couldn't see, marked a paradigm shift in naval warfare. For the first time in history, a battleship engaged and destroyed another battleship using radar fire control exclusively, without visual confirmation of the target until after shells were already hitting. The engagement proved that electronics could replace human eyes, that machines could calculate faster and more accurately than experienced gunners, that darkness no longer protected anyone. Japanese night-fighting doctrine, 15 years of development, thousands of training hours, combat-proven tactics became obsolete in 7 minutes. American radar superiority meant Japanese optical advantages were irrelevant. Type 88 binoculars seeing 10,000 yards couldn't compete with Mark 8 radar seeing 20,000 yards. Flashless powder-hiding gun positions meant nothing when the enemy tracked you electronically. Star shells illuminating targets were pointless when radar needed no illumination. Everything Japan had perfected for night combat was suddenly worthless. Admiral Lee's post-battle assessment was brutally honest. We realized then, and it should not be forgotten now, that our entire superiority was due almost entirely to our possession of radar. Certainly we have no edge on the Japs in experience, skill, training, or performance of personnel. He was right. Washington's crew was inexperienced. Most had never seen combat before this night. Kirishima's crew were veterans. Japanese sailors were superb. Their training was rigorous. Their courage was unquestionable. None of it mattered. Technology trumped experience. Electronics defeated expertise. The side that could see won. The side that fought blind lost. The lesson wasn't lost on American naval commanders. Within weeks, radar fire control became the highest priority. Every battleship, every cruiser, every destroyer needed radar. Training programs accelerated. Production ramped up. The technology that won at Guadalcanal would spread fleet-wide within months. By 1943, radar-equipped American ships dominated every night engagement. Japanese forces, unable to match American electronics production or close the technology gap, never regained night-fighting superiority. The balance of power shifted permanently, and in 4,200 feet of water off Guadalcanal, Kirishima rested with her hull perforated by shells fired by men who never saw their target, a monument to the moment radar made darkness transparent and doctrine obsolete. Dawn, November 15th, 1942. The sun rose over Guadalcanal to reveal Vice Admiral Kondo's convoy exposed and defenseless. 11 transport ships steamed south without battleship cover, without the bombardment that would have destroyed Henderson Field's aircraft. The gamble, proceeding despite Kirishima's loss, was about to fail catastrophically. Henderson Field's dive bombers, torpedo bombers, and fighters launched at first light. Marine and Navy pilots had watched the night battle from the ground, seeing gun flashes and fires illuminating the horizon. They knew something major had happened. Now, with transports visible from reconnaissance aircraft, they knew exactly what to do. The massacre lasted all day. Dive bombers screamed down on the slow-moving transports, planting 500-pound bombs through thin decks. Torpedo bombers launched their weapons at point-blank range against ships that couldn't maneuver effectively in confined waters. Fighters strafed crowded decks where soldiers stood packed together, unable to take cover. The transports had no heavy anti-aircraft batteries. Their light machine guns were useless against aircraft attacking from multiple directions simultaneously. By day's end, 7 of the 11 transports were sunk. 4 more were heavily damaged, barely making it to beaches where they grounded themselves in desperate attempts to unload. Of the 7,000 troops embarked, approximately 4,000 died, drowned when ships sank, killed by bombs and strafing, or trapped in burning holds. Of the supplies, artillery pieces, ammunition, food, medical equipment, 80% went to the bottom. The reinforcement mission, planned for months and executed with Japan's finest naval forces covering it, achieved almost nothing. The strategic impact rippled outward. Guadalcanal's Japanese garrison, already on starvation rations, received almost no supplies. Henderson Field remained operational, controlling daylight skies over the Solomons. American forces could continue building up strength, while Japanese forces withered. The campaign's momentum shifted irreversibly. By February 1943, Japan evacuated Guadalcanal, abandoning 11,000 dead on the island. The first major Allied offensive victory in the Pacific stemmed directly from Washington's November 15th engagement, but the implications transcended one campaign. November 15th demonstrated that radar fire control worked, not theoretically, not in controlled tests, but in actual combat under the worst conditions imaginable. Night, confined waters, moving targets. Electronic warfare in its infancy proving superior to decades of optical doctrine refinement. The message reached every naval power instantly. Whoever controlled radar technology controlled the seas. American naval doctrine transformed overnight. Radar became the absolute priority. Production of Mark 8 fire control systems accelerated. By 1943, 205 units equipped battleships and cruisers fleet-wide. SG surface search radar proliferated to destroyers and patrol craft. Training programs expanded, frantically rushing officers and sailors through radar operation courses. Ships without radar were considered obsolete, vulnerable, unfit for combat. The technology that won at Guadalcanal spread like wildfire because commanders understood, without radar you fought blind against enemies who saw everything. Rear Admiral Willis Augustus Lee became legendary. The radar admiral, officers called him, the man who trusted machines over human eyes and proved that trust justified. His Olympic marksmanship background made perfect sense in retrospect. A man who won 5 gold medals by calculating angles, windage, and trajectories, understood that precision wins battles. Radar gave him the precision optical systems couldn't match. His post-battle assessment, our entire superiority was due almost entirely to our possession of radar, became required reading at the Naval Academy. Lee went on to command fast battleship divisions through 1944, participating in the Marianas Campaign and the Battle of the Philippine Sea. He died of a heart attack in August 1945, just weeks before Japan's surrender, still advocating for technological innovation and electronic warfare supremacy. Japanese forces never recovered from the radar gap. Their electronics industry, strained by resource shortages and fighting across multiple fronts, couldn't match American production capacity. Japanese engineers developed improved radar, Type 21 air search, Type 22 Mod 4 surface search, but the systems remained inferior to American equivalents and arrived too late to matter. By 1943, every night engagement favored American radar-equipped ships. Japanese doctrine, built on 15 years of optical superiority, became irrelevant. Battles like the Battle of Cape St. George in November 1943 saw American destroyers using radar to ambush Japanese forces in darkness. The tables completely turned from Savo Island. The technology lineage from Mark 8 extends directly to modern naval warfare. Mark 8 evolved into Mark 13, then Mark 37, each generation improving range, accuracy, and reliability. By the 1950s, analog computers gave way to digital systems. The 1980s brought Aegis combat systems with Spy-1 phased array radar capable of tracking hundreds of targets simultaneously and engaging multiple threats automatically. Modern destroyers and cruisers see 300 miles through electronic eyes, launching missiles, guided by radar and satellite data to hit targets over the horizon. Every system traces lineage to November 15, 1942. The night radar made darkness obsolete. 50 years later, in 1992, Dr. Tuel Robert Ballard's deep-sea exploration team discovered Kirishima's wreck. The battleship rests at coordinates 1 degree 22 minutes south, 159 degrees 47 minutes east, in 4,200 feet of water. The wreck lies upside down, flipped during her death plunge. Ballard's survey documented at least 9 16-inch shell penetrations through armor, smaller holes than expected, because the armor-piercing shells punched through and exploded inside before the steel could tear wider. The wreck verified American action reports. Washington's gunnery had been devastatingly accurate. The discovery closed a historical loop. Survivors' accounts from both sides matched the physical evidence. Kirishima had been destroyed by shells fired from beyond visual range by gunners who never saw their target. The impossible, verified by wreckage on the seafloor. Modern navies learn from November 15th constantly. The lesson isn't just about radar, it's about technological adaptation. Japanese doctrine was excellent, refined, proven, effective, but excellence in old technology loses to competence in new technology. The side that adapts fastest wins. The side that clings to proven methods loses when those methods become obsolete. Radar changed naval warfare in 1942 the same way carrier aviation changed it in 1941, the same way guided missiles changed it in the 1960s, the same way cyber warfare is changing it now. Innovation trumps tradition. Seeing first means winning first. Petty Officer First Class Saburo Nakamura, the fictional composite representing Kirishima's lookouts, experienced what no sailor had experienced before, attack by an invisible enemy. His training was perfect. His equipment was the best optical technology available. His skill was unquestionable. None of it mattered. The Americans could see through darkness, using electromagnetic pulses he couldn't comprehend. They hit targets with uncanny accuracy while his ship's gunners fired blindly. The impossible had become real. The promises his commanders made, Japanese night fighting superiority is absolute, American radar is primitive, were catastrophically wrong. That realization spread through the Imperial Japanese Navy after November 15th. Confidence shattered. If American radar could destroy Kirishima in 7 minutes, no Japanese ship was safe in darkness. The psychological impact was as devastating as the tactical defeat. For the rest of the war, Japanese naval forces approached night combat with fear rather than confidence. The superiority complex built on Savo Island and a dozen other victories evaporated. American forces owned the night. Admiral Lee's gamble on November 14th, ordering his ship to engage targets beyond visual range, trusting radar completely, fighting blind but seeing everything, proved justified beyond any prediction. He'd taken untested technology into the worst possible conditions and won decisively. Washington emerged undamaged. Hiroshima sank. The convoy was massacred. Henderson Field survived. Guadalcanal was saved. And naval warfare changed forever. The video title posed a question: Japan never expected naval gunfire radar to hit targets at 20+ miles. November 15th answered that question definitively. Japan didn't expect it because they didn't believe it possible. Their intelligence underestimated American radar capability. Their doctrine assumed optical systems remained supreme. Their confidence blinded them to the technological revolution happening in their enemy's fleet. They learned the truth when 16-inch shells arrived from nowhere, destroying their battleship in 7 minutes, fired by gunners who never saw the target. Radar changed the rules. The side that saw first won first. Japan never caught up. America never looked back. And in 4,200 feet of water off Guadalcanal, Hiroshima rests as a monument to the night technology, killed tradition, and made darkness transparent forever.